The heavy, oak-framed mirror in my hallway doesn't lie to me anymore. At 96 years old, I see a map of 1,000 different lives etched into my skin. My knees groan like rusted hinges when I stand, and I'll admit to you, I spend a fair portion of my morning wandering from room to room wondering where on earth I've left my spectacles. But while the present moment sometimes feels like a blur, the past has a way of sharpening itself until it cuts. I remember the arguments. I remember the heavy, suffocating silences that lasted for days. I remember the long nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the most catastrophic mistake a human being can make. I have something to tell you today that most people are too polite or too romantic to say out loud. It is a truth that might sting at first, but it is the only reason I reached 64 years of marriage. Here it is: you probably married the wrong person. And you know what? That is perfectly okay. In fact, it might be the very thing that saves you. Before you turn away or think I've grown cynical in my old age, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share is the exact opposite of everything the movies, the songs, and the poets have ever told you about finding a soulmate. Let's go back to when the world was colored in shades of gold and certainty. I was 24 years old when I stood at the altar with Ernesto. He was handsome, in that rugged, quiet way men were back then. He had a steady job at the factory on the outskirts of Córdoba, and he possessed a laugh that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. When we danced in my parents' courtyard on our wedding night, under strings of colored lights draped through the orange trees, I was convinced I had solved the great puzzle of life. My mother was weeping with joy, my father was shaking Ernesto's hand with a pride I'd never seen, and I felt like the luckiest woman in Spain. I truly believed that love was a destination. I thought that if you simply found the right person, the rest of your life would unfold like a beautiful, effortless carpet. How spectacularly wrong I was. By our 3rd year of marriage, the gold began to flake off the frame. Reality doesn't arrive all at once, it leaks in through the small cracks. It started with the kitchen sink. Ernesto would leave his dirty dishes right there, day after day, as if a magic fairy were going to whisk them away. It sounds like nothing, doesn't it? But when you've washed the same crusty plate for the 1,000th time, it starts to feel like a personal insult. He was a silent man when I craved conversation, yet he seemed to find his voice only when I was desperate for 5 minutes of peace. He had a way of spending money that made my blood boil, buying expensive tools for projects he never finished, or inviting half the neighborhood over for dinner without giving me so much as a 10-minute warning. Then there was the way he parented. We had our first daughter, Rosa, and suddenly we were strangers fighting over a map. He was too harsh when I wanted to be gentle. He was too permissive when I felt we needed structure. We fought about his mother, who seemed to have an opinion on everything from the way I seasoned the stew to the way I tucked in the bedsheets. We fought about my friends, who he claimed stayed too late and talked too loud. These weren't grand, cinematic battles. They were small, gritty, exhausting frictions. At 27, sitting in a house that felt too small with a toddler who wouldn't stop crying, I began to panic. I looked at the man snoring on the other side of the bed and thought, I've made a mistake. I've picked the wrong one. A marriage shouldn't feel like this much work. I remember a particularly grey October morning. I walked over to my neighbor Carmen's house. Carmen was a force of nature. She'd been married for 30 years and moved through life with a calm, unshakable wisdom. I sat at her scarred wooden kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee, and I let it all out. I told her I wasn't happy. I told her that Ernesto and I were fundamentally incompatible. I confessed that I often looked out the window at the passing cars and wondered where I'd be if I had chosen someone else, someone who liked the same books, someone who didn't leave socks on the floor, someone who understood my silences. I expected Carmen to pull me into a hug and tell me I deserved better. Instead, she let out a belly laugh that shook the cups on the table. It wasn't a mean laugh, it was the laugh of someone who has seen the end of the movie and knows how it turns out. She leaned in, her eyes twinkling, and said something that changed the trajectory of my life. Oh, honey, we all marry the wrong person. The secret isn't finding the right one, the secret is deciding to turn the person you're with into the right one. At the time, I thought she was just being cynical. I thought she was settling. But now, looking back from the vantage point of nearly a century, I see that Carmen was the greatest romantic I've ever known. You see, the person you marry at 24 is not the person you are living with at 40, and they are certainly not the person you are holding hands with at 80. Life is a brutal, beautiful forge. It beats us, it heats us up, and it reshapes us. If you marry someone because of who they are today, you are going to be very disappointed in 10 years when that person no longer exists. I didn't just marry Ernesto, I married a dozen different men who all happened to have the same name. There was the 30-year-old Ernesto, ambitious, impatient, always chasing a promotion, his mind always 5 miles down the road. Then came the 50-year-old Ernesto, tired, burdened by the weight of providing for 5 children, quieter, sometimes prone to long bouts of melancholy. Then there was the 70-year-old Ernesto, who suddenly became tender. He started noticing the way the light hit the flowers in the garden. He started saying I love you without being prompted. And finally, there was the 85-year-old Ernesto, the man who needed me to help him button his shirt and remind him which pill was for his heart and which was for his blood pressure. Which one of those men was my soulmate? The ambitious one? The tired one? The tender one? The answer is, all of them, and none of them. Because I wasn't the same woman, either. I was the shy bride, then the fierce young mother, then the woman broken by the loss of her own parents, then the confident grandmother, and finally the frail woman sitting before you now. We were two shifting shapes, constantly changing, trying to stay in rhythm while the music kept changing tempo. The reason we made it 64 years wasn't because we were made for each other. We weren't. We were two stubborn, flawed individuals from different backgrounds with different temperaments. We made it because, on the days when we didn't like each other, and believe me, there were entire years when I didn't particularly like him, we never stopped choosing each other. Modern romance tells you that if it's work, it's not right. They tell you that love should be a spark that never fades. But sparks are cheap. Sparks start fires, but they don't keep the house warm for 60 years. For that, you need logs. You need to chop the wood, you need to tend the embers, and sometimes, you have to sit in the cold for a bit until the flame catches again. Marriage is the decision to keep choosing an imperfect person, even when their imperfections are driving you to the brink of madness. I remember a time in our late 40s. The kids were leaving the nest, and the house felt deafeningly quiet. Ernesto and I had forgotten how to talk to each other without a child as a buffer. We spent 3 months barely speaking. Every time he cleared his throat, it annoyed me. Every time I sighed, he rolled his eyes. I remember sitting on the porch, looking at the moon, and thinking, is this it? Is this the rest of my life? I could have left. I could have looked for that spark elsewhere. But I remembered Carmen's laugh. I realized that Ernesto wasn't wrong for me, we were just in a hard season. So, I went inside, I made 2 cups of tea, and I sat down next to him. I didn't say anything profound. I just sat there. And eventually, he reached over and put his hand on mine. It wasn't a movie moment. It was just 2 old, tired people deciding to keep going. There is a profound beauty in the wrong person. When you realize your partner isn't perfect, you stop demanding perfection from them. You start to see their flaws not as deal breakers, but as landscapes you haven't explored yet. You learn to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you know you'll need that same forgiveness by Tuesday. You learn that intimacy isn't just about the moments of passion, it's about the moments of shared endurance. It's about being the one who knows exactly how they take their coffee and which side of their back aches when it rains. I watched Ernesto take his last breath in a hospital bed when I was 88. As I held his hand, a hand that was now wrinkled and spotted with age, a hand that had worked in a factory, held our babies, and occasionally slammed a door in anger, I didn't think about our perfect moments. I didn't think about the wedding day or the vacations. I thought about the time we survived the year he lost his job. I thought about the night we stayed up crying when Rosa got sick. I thought about the 1,000 times we chose to stay when it would have been so much easier to leave. If you are struggling right now, if you are looking at your partner and feeling a sense of resentment or boredom, I want you to take a deep breath. Stop looking for the right person. They don't exist. There is no one on this planet who will satisfy every part of your soul. There is no one who won't eventually annoy you, disappoint you, or fail to understand you. The goal isn't to find someone who never makes you cry, The goal is to find someone whose imperfections you are willing to embrace, and who is willing to embrace yours in return. Real love isn't a feeling you fall into. It's a structure you build, brick by brick, through the heat of the summer and the bite of the winter. It is made of "I'm sorry, I was wrong, and let's try again tomorrow." It is the most difficult, grueling, and unglamorous thing you will ever do. But at 96, looking back over the long road I traveled with Ernesto, I can tell you this: it was worth every argument. It was worth every tear. It was worth every moment of doubt. Don't throw away a diamond just because it hasn't been polished yet. Don't leave a good man or a good woman just because they aren't the fantasy you had when you were 20. Fantasy is easy. Reality is where the magic happens. Reality is a 64-year-long conversation that only ends when one of you can no longer speak. The house is quiet now, and my spectacles are still missing. I live with the echoes of Ernesto's footsteps, and sometimes I still find myself starting to tell him something before I remember he's gone. But I am not lonely. I am full. I am full of the life we built, the wrong person and me. We took our flaws and our mistakes and we wove them into something so strong that even death couldn't truly tear it apart. So, if you're sitting there wondering if you've made a mistake, maybe you have. Maybe you did marry the wrong person. But my advice to you is this: stay. Work. Choose. Turn them into the right person. Because one day, you'll be 96, looking in a hallway mirror, and you'll realize that the mistake you made was actually the greatest blessing of your life. The real version of love isn't finding a soulmate, it's creating one. And that, my dear, is the only thing that truly matters in the end. Thank you for listening to an old woman's rambling. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really do need to find those glasses. Be kind to each other. It's a long walk, and it's much better when you have a hand to hold, even if it's a hand that sometimes forgets to do the dishes.